programme.
I am Roisin Reynolds, and I'm the Senior Advisor for the Alcohol Exposed Pregnancy Programme.
So the purpose of this afternoon's session is very much, as it sounds, it's just a bite size, so just a very brief overview where we'll be looking at alcohol harm in pregnancy and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Just bring up the slides. Are they clear to everyone? They're up?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So Drymester is an awareness campaign that's been running for a number of years now as part of the Alcohol Exposed Pregnancy Programme. The aim of the campaign is to raise awareness of alcohol harm in pregnancy, equip people with the correct advice in relation to the Chief Medical Officer's guidance, and to support parents and families to have healthy alcohol-free pregnancies. So we're holding this session today to really help you spread the word. If we don't know the right advice there, we're not able to support others. So we're hoping that this session will help us all to have a better understanding. So did you know that it's estimated that 41% of pregnancies in the UK are alcohol exposed? That's actually the 4th highest in the world. And what that means is that alcohol was used at any stage during the pregnancy. And we do know that there might be lots of different reasons why somebody might use alcohol when they're pregnant. But one of those is that they just don't know that it can be harmful. And that's why through these sessions like this, we're really keen at them to address that. That doesn't need to happen. You know, people can quite easily have the correct information if we support each other. So what are the harms? What are the complications of using alcohol during pregnancy? So some of the effects can be, as you might imagine, miscarriage, higher rates of stillbirth, or higher rates of premature birth, and also fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And this is what we're going to look at in a little bit more detail in this session. So you may or you may not be familiar with the term fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Often people may be familiar with fetal alcohol syndrome, and that's where alcohol has caused harm during a certain part of the pregnancy, which means someone has quite distinct facial features. But actually, people who are affected, only 10% of people would have those facial features. So FASD is a much broader term for the harm that is caused during pregnancy. And it's what we call an umbrella term used to describe the range of lifelong disabilities that drinking alcohol can cause to a baby. So there are actually in excess of 400 known conditions that occur under FASD. So these can include developmental problems, physical problems, mental, emotional, learning impairments. Very often people with FASD may be diagnosed with ADHD, they may be diagnosed with autism, and although they may have those diagnoses as well as FASD, they're often not diagnosed with FASD. People affected are often described as having behavioural problems or assumed to be having behavioural problems, and more than often their difficulties can be put down to poor parenting, and it might be that the parents are put on parenting courses which don't work because the difficulties that are being experienced have been caused by the brain damage that occurred through the alcohol exposure during the pregnancy. There isn't a safe time to use alcohol during pregnancy. So throughout development of the central nervous system and the brain and the limbs, if alcohol is used, it will cause harm in that development process. Really keen, probably maybe be surprised, no, it's actually the leading known preventable intellectual disability. So a few years ago, as we started our work, we weren't able to describe, or we wouldn't have been able to tell you how prevalent FASD was in Greater Manchester because there were no UK prevalence studies at that time. There's some because there was research from internationally, but nothing within the UK. So in September of this year, Salford University published their prevalence studies. They were commissioned through our programme, and they completed what's called an active case ascertainment study. And this meant that they went into schools across Greater Manchester and assessed children for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And what they found was that we had a prevalence rate in Greater Manchester between 1.8 and 3.6% of children. So it's really quite high prevalence if we think that autism, the rates approximately 2%. But what this figure does do is does align with the studies that have been done internationally. That means that on an annual basis, there's just over 1,200 children being born every year affected. And we would expect there'd be a similar number of children starting school as well every year. Now, those children, it's very unlikely that they will have a diagnosis. They might be already starting to experience a number of difficulties, but it won't necessarily be known or supported. Roisin, do you want to pick this up?
Sorry, apologies, I'm still on mute. So I'll pick up from here. Thanks, Rachel. So I think, as Rachel already said, you may well have heard of fetal alcohol syndrome, which is very much a child born with the facial features, and only 10% of children are actually born with those facial features, which means 90% don't have them. So it does mean that the baby is about potentially around 18 months up to 2 before parents are really starting to pick up that something isn't quite right, that they're not necessarily meeting their milestones in the way that they normally would. We're actually moving away internationally now from fetal alcohol syndrome as being a term that we're using. And internationally, we're looking at using fetal alcohol spectrum disorder with sentinel facial features, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder without sentinel facial features. So what you would find is that a child with FASD will have a small head circumference. They will be below average height and weight for their age, and they may well have low set ears as part of their facial distinctions. They can have a variety of kind of physical activity. There is brain damage. Alcohol actually affects the frontal lobe. Now, as a result of frontal lobe damage, it does mean that a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder potentially doesn't have a defined learning disability. To be diagnosed with a learning disability, you have to have an IQ of 70 or below. Children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder often have an IQ in the low 70s. But as Rachel said, 1,200 odd children entering school at age 4. One of the first things that they might do if they're picking up something's not right is an IQ test. They will pass the IQ test even though they're at the lower range, and that often is the only thing that's done then for a period of time while the child is not really engaging in education. The physical impact will be their heart defects, they can have kidney damage, they can have bone formation defects, and they can also have limb damage. In relation to cognitively, what that means is they will have problems with time, money, or maths. Now, across the spectrum, there are 428 different symptoms associated with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. But one of the very common ones for children or for people with FASD is association with numbers. So keeping time, keeping memory, and kind of maths. They have poor impulse control. They may have a learning difficulty, which I've already described. They have problems in social understanding and therefore connecting with people in a social way and having appropriate social interactions with people. They often have problems in memory, attention, or judgment, and they have problems perceiving and processing language. For the physical effects, which are the ones that you may see, in order to get a diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome, you have to have these 3 that we've described here. So you have to have the thin upper lip, you have to have the smooth philtrum, which is the ridge between your upper lip and your nose, and you have to have the small and wide set eyes. but there are a number of other physical features as well. Sometimes that they may have what's described as a button nose, so a straight nose ridge, or they might have a sort of a flat face, flat cheeks. But those three are the three that you actually have to have in order to get a fetal alcohol syndrome diagnosis. What I also want to say at this point is FASD cannot be picked up through genetic testing. Now, as part of our research, all of the children involved did have genetic testing, but that was to ensure that everything else would be ruled out. And therefore, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder could be given as a diagnosis, but it isn't a neurodevelopment cognitive problem that you can pick up through genetics. So for an 18-year-old with FASD, this is how they may present. Now, this is not absolutely everybody with FASD, as we've described. There are 428 different symptomologies, and obviously the earlier any child with a neurodevelopment problem gets assessed and gets the support, and in some cases the treatment that they require, they will progress through life very, very differently. So this is just kind of try and give you an atypical idea. So an 18-year-old with FASD may have the expressive language of a 20-year-old. So they can actually talk the talk. What they don't do is understand what the conversations that are going around them. And one of the parents that we work with, she's got a kind of 15, 16-year-old boy, and she'll describe him as freezing with a smile. So he will nod and he will smile and he will laugh when other people are laughing, but actually he has no understanding of the conversation that's happening around them. They will have money and time concept of an 8-year-old, living skills of an 11-year-old, the reading ability of a 16-year-old, the social skills of a 7-year-old, and the comprehension and emotional maturity of a 6-year-old. So for individuals with FASD, they are significantly behind their peers, especially in relation to education. One thing that I will say is that if a child has a particular talent, a child with FASD has a particular talent, actually that they can become very, very, very good at that. Some very creative children with FASD, especially around things like music. And we've heard a young Manchester-based child with FASD who is a phenomenal saxophonist, just absolutely can't read music, can't follow music, but actually learns through hearing it, and is a phenomenal saxophonist. We have a mum who supports 2 of her children, one who plays the cello and the other who plays the piano. So they can be supported in actually living a very, very productive life and actually being very good at something. Next slide, Rachel. So I'm going to do a little experiment now just to show you something. Now, this is normally done during live training at the beginning of the day. So what we'll end up doing is having to send Sophie a picture towards the end of the day that she can send on to you to show. So I'm just going to show you a glass here. This is just a glass of room temperature cold water, and I'm going to add an egg to it. This is an empty glass that I'm going to add some really cheap rum to, and I'm also going to add an egg to it. Right, so I don't know if you can pick that up. So this is the water. Put that on my left. This is the rum. So I don't know if you can pick up that it's already starting to cook slightly. So I'm going to leave this and we're going to come back to it at the very end of the session. And then, like I said, at the end of the day, I'll send a photograph to Sophie that she can share with you. Or this is potentially just something that you can do at home. Any form of kind of white alcohol. This is just a really cheap rum that we had. Okay, so knowing the expert advice, the Chief Medical Officer's advice since 2016 has very clearly been that if you're pregnant or planning to become pregnant, the safest approach is not to drink alcohol at all, to keep risks to the baby to a minimum. Now, whilst this became the Chief Medical Officer's advice in 2016, There was no major comms associated with it. It just went out on the website and everybody was expected to know it. The difficulty was that is NICE up until 2019 continued to say that it was okay to drink a couple of units of alcohol a couple of times a week. And actually nationally, people really don't understand what units are at home. So if you're kind of thinking about you're drinking, if you're pouring your own drinks at home, do you really know looking at it? Well, that's 1 unit, or that's 2 units. And when does the week start? Does it start on a Monday or does it start on a Sunday? So it can be very, very varied. But both NICE and the Chief Medical Officer are both very clearly saying the same thing now, that if you're pregnant or planning to become pregnant, the safest approach is to not drink alcohol at all. 1 in 13 alcohol exposed pregnancies will result in a child being born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. What we don't know is why the other 12 aren't. So we don't know why one woman can drink alcohol during pregnancy and the child seem to be unaffected, yet somebody else can and the child will be affected, which is the reason why it's really important that people pregnant people are being given this information and given this advice, and that they're able to therefore make an informed decision based on up-to-date, accurate advice. Okay, so where to go for support? So across Greater Manchester, we would very much ensure that if you're pregnant, to book an appointment with your midwife or GP. For FASD and alcohol support services across Greater Manchester, you can visit our website, which is drymester.org.uk. For free and helpful tips and advice, there's again lots of information on the Drymester website. And there should be a final box. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, I don't think there is.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so our programme, just to give you an overview of what we've been doing for the last 3 years, we're the only alcohol exposed pregnancy programme in the UK. And some of the work that we have done has actually been picked up both nationally and internationally. There were 3 arms to our programme, which was prevention, support and knowledge. So the knowledge element, Rachel has already discussed. We commissioned the first ever UK prevalence study. And across Greater Manchester, we found it to be between 1.8 and 3.6%. The reason in that variation is that after the children were initially assessed, they had to be consented into the second stage of the research. At that point, some of the parents refused to allow the children to go into the second stage of the research. And also, unfortunately, there were some children who were looked after children, and the social services as their guardians also refused to allow them to go into the second stage of the research. These were children that actually were the most at risk. And the research team were confident that actually they would have had a diagnosis of FASD. As part of the research, what they did find, and again, anecdotally, this is happening across research across the UK, is that young girls are really flying under the radar. So there are 2 girls that were diagnosed with FASD as part of this research programme who weren't even open to the SENCO within school. They were just perceived as being very quiet, timid girls who sat at the back of the classroom and really didn't speak to anybody else. And that's kind of coming out now. That's not uncommon. So the girls seem to be able to manage more and have slight more resilience within school and can manage their emotions compared to young boys. So from our support element of it, we developed specialist enhanced midwifery support through pregnancy. And this was across what was originally Pennine Acute, but is now Northern Care Alliance and Tameside Hospital. And we also established a peer support during and post-pregnancy programme. Unfortunately, that element of the programme has now finished due to our programme has ended, and therefore the funding for that element of the programme has ended. But the development of the enhanced midwifery support is now embedded in both Tameside Acute and across Northern Care Alliance. And Stockport are also just about to launch their alcohol exposed pregnancy pathway as well. From a prevention point of view, we delivered lots of training with an organisation called Red Balloon Training, who has Red Balloon have delivered training nationally. And we have also commissioned National FASD to develop an e-learning package, which is now available via their eSchool, which is about 3.5 hours, and it's actually Red Balloon Training worked with them to develop that training based on the other work that we did. In relation to raising awareness in schools, we commissioned a play from Oldham Theatre Workshop, and this play was seen in October of 2019 by over 5,000 secondary school students, and it was really extremely well evaluated. So on the back of the evaluation, we went back to Oldham Theatre Workshop and actually commissioned them to make that play into a film, and that film was launched in June of last year. The film is actually available on the Oldham Theatre Workshop website. It's a free resource. It's about 40 minutes long and can be shown either all together or can be shown in 3 different snippets to fit in with things like PHSE lessons, and there's lots of lesson plans and additional information associated with it. So certainly if any of you work with youth groups, or you're a scout leader or a guide leader, that might be a resource that you would think about utilising for that piece of work. We did some pre-pregnancy interventions, and this was really where we worked with community-based organisations who were working with women who were 16 to 44, who were sexually active, who were using alcohol and were not using an effective form of contraception. And those pre-pregnancy interventions were really to have conversations with these women about either having an appropriate form of contraception or actually addressing their alcohol use if they weren't planning a pregnancy. And if they were planning a pregnancy, ensuring that they had the appropriate information in relation to the risks that they were taking. We introduced universal alcohol screening, advice, guidance, and brief interventions, as we've talked about already, across those organisations. And as well as that, we increased access to long-acting reversible contraception, LARC, for vulnerable groups. And how we did this is that a number of midwives across the trust that we were working with trained in giving LARC, which was then offered at the point of discharge following having women having had a baby. And that has been really, really successful. And there have been a number of vulnerable women who potentially previously wouldn't have necessarily taken up a contraception offer, who have now done so and therefore have reduced the risk of another alcohol exposed pregnancy. Okay, next slide. So when Rachel and I started in this role 3 years ago, there were actually no government drivers associated with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We've been very, very lucky that since then there have been a number of them. The most recent one being NICE. So NICE have brought out FASD quality standards. Now, normally for NICE to reduce quality standards, you actually have to have NICE guidance. But Scotland's equivalent to NICE, called SIGN, brought out their guidance for FASD, SIGN 156, at the back end of 2019. And as a result of that, NICE were able to adopt them and come up with the standards. Now, the great thing about that is guidance takes up to about 7 years to get through legislation, whereas standards actually normally take about 18 months. Unfortunately, this fell in the COVID period, so it actually took about 3 years, but we're still significantly further ahead than we would have been if we had to do a 7-year guidance. So there are 5 statements. The first and the second are specifically in relation to pregnancy, so that pregnant women have to be given advice throughout pregnancy not to drink alcohol, and that pregnant women are asked about their alcohol use throughout their pregnancy, and that this is recorded. Now, across across Tameside and Northern Care Alliance and now Stockport, that's going to be asked on 3 occasions: on initial contact, on the booking appointment, and at 36 weeks. And up until recently, Tameside have been using Tweak as a tool, but they're moving to Audit C, and Pennine Acute have always used, Northern Care Alliance have always used Audit C, and Stockport are also going to be using Audit C as the tool that they've been used. And these tools are actually now embedded in their EMIS system or their EuroKing system, whatever clinical note system they're actually using. Quality 3 and 4 are in relation to access to assessment if there is a probable prenatal alcohol exposure or if there's confirmed prenatal alcohol exposure. This is actually really important because currently there is only one NHS clinic in the country that offers assessment, and that clinic is in Surrey, which is run by Dr. Raju Mukherjee, who is the clinical expert in the country. Their waiting list is now so long that they've closed to all new referrals. Now, prior to COVID, their waiting list sat at 2 years. So I don't know what their waiting list now, but it's so long that this. So unless there is a local paediatrician who feels that they have enough experience and knowledge to diagnose FASD, often these parents can spend a long time fighting the system in relation to getting a appropriate assessment. A lot of children with FASD are misdiagnosed with ADHD and autism because there are some very, very similar traits associated with both. And the missing bit is questions around exposure and prenatal alcohol exposure. That's often the part that's missing in the wider assessments. The final quality statement, which is the one that actually parents with lived experience are the happiest about, is that children now have to have a management plan to address their needs. That's the first time that's been quantified. The other main paper that came out was published in September of last year, which is the Department of Health and Social Care did a national FASD needs assessment, looking at the needs of children nationally in relation to FASD. And the work that we've done in Greater Manchester has been cited as good practice within those guidelines, or within that assessment, which is really good. Okay, so just going back to our eggs. I think it's going to be really difficult for you to see this now, but this is the, yeah. You can see that this is the rump. Can any of you see that it's starting to kind of cook slightly compared to the water? That's the rump. And that's the water. So like I said, I will take pictures of that later. I'll leave it a while just to kind of give you an idea of what it actually looked like. So as Rachel said at the beginning, this is really our Spread the Word campaign. This is about ensuring as many people know as possible about the facility, the resources that are available on the Drymester website and all of our social media outlets. If you are interested in this area, we do tweet all of the new research, all of the up-to-date information. We connect with all of the, with Salford University, who are the national leads around FASD research, and also with National FASD. So certainly join us on Twitter if this is an area of interest for you. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're really open to any questions or comments.